We're talking about reclaiming the profound knowings of the eye of the Spirit. It's not by accident that the Christian philosopher Aquinas cited the great work of David, the old king in Jerusalem, who said about knowing, Tamu ur'u ki tov Adonai, taste and see that God is good. Taste divinity, taste ultimate knowing. And your seeing comes from tasting. It's talking about a particular form of knowing. Now remember, when we say God is good, the God you don't believe in doesn't exist. We're not talking about the ethnocentric, mythic God who brings you the dogma of the old church, which is a form of domination, right? Which allows the church to rule Europe for 2,000 years. Whether that's the Church of Imperial Japan or the Church of Christian Europe or the Church of Asia, it doesn't matter. We're talking about God as all that is, God as the great systems of reality, God as the personal face of the great systems. We're talking about the divine that you feel living in you, as you, and through you. A different way of saying that is we're talking about God in the first person, God in the second person, and God in the third person. The first person God is the experience of I am, the experience that you get through practicing the eye of the Spirit, where you actually experience the divine as yourself. You experience your supreme identity with divinity. You know that you're not actually separate from God, even as you bow before the divine. Right? The second knowing of the divine is the experience of being in communication with the divine, of being held in the divine arms, knowing that every place you fall into God. Right? Tasting that feeling of being held. Right? The Hebrew word emunah is usually translated as faith, but it's not dogmatic faith. Emunah comes from the same Hebrew root word of omein, and omein is the nursing mother. So faith is the experience that the baby has, right, that he or she is being held by the mother, and the mother won't drop the baby. But that's not a faith of dogma. That's a felt faith that's yielded by the experience of spiritual practice. In the experience of spiritual practice, I actually feel myself being ultimately held by the universe no matter what's happening. Ultimately held, right, by a personal face of a caring divinity, right, that lives and breathes in relationship to me, before which I kneel, before which I bow. And not giving up my autonomy, right? Not giving up my autonomy to old church dogma. No, it's not about that at all. It's about the experience of being held. So that's God in the second person. That's the second face of the divine. Right? The first face of the divine, right? The experience of I am. What the Buddhists called the Buddha. The experience of I am Buddha. I feel the Buddha that lives in me, as me, and through me. Right? As our friend Surya Das likes to say, right? Don't worry about Buddhism, right? Just be the Buddha. Right? And it's experience God in the first person living in you, as you, and through you. And through that, expand your reality so much beyond your small self. Actually feel yourself as big mind and big heart. Feel that living alive in you and as you. God in the second person, the experience of being held by the divine. What Solomon calls smolo tachat roshi v'yamino tichapkeni. Your left hand is under my head, your right hand embraces me. Right? That actual felt experience of having a personal relationship with all that is. That's the second face of the divine. And the third face of the divine, the great systems of knowing and spirit, the systems of dharma, the systems of science, right? The systems of sociology, right? All the great systems, right? Based on all the different forms of knowing that form the great superstructure of reality in all of its infinity, right? The infinite cosmos, systems within systems, right? Systems upon systems, systems interlocked with systems. That's God in the third person. That's the great web of its, right? That is available to us when we actually empirically look at reality. All three of these are faces of the divine. The impersonal cosmos and the infinity of cosmos unfolding, right? The personal face being held by the divine. The God that lives in me. Those are the three faces of the divine. The Buddhists called that Buddha, God in the first person. Sangha, right? The we relationship. What Buber called the I and thou. The miracle of we, as we like to say in the integral communities. And then Dharma, the third person, the great Dharmas. Dharma means the great third person knowings of divinity that reveal themselves and disclose themselves to us. That's what we mean when we talk about God. So taste and see, right, that God is good. Right? You access that God through different forms of knowing. Right? One of those forms of knowing, right, for parts of the third person are scientific. So part of the third person knowing, right, is scientific. That's it. Other parts of third person knowing, which are called dharma, right, are known through other ways. Right? There's ways that we know law. There's ways that we know values. There's the ways that we know ethical principles, which are valid and powerful and verifiable, which are different modes of knowing. So we need to access all three of these faces of the divine. Right? The first face of God, God in the first person, Buddha. God in the second person, right? Sangha. Right? God in the third person, Dharma. Or another way of saying the same thing is the good, the true, and the beautiful. Right? The beautiful is my subjective I experience. It's the first person of knowing. It's the aesthetics of knowing, the internal subjective experience of the I, which is a form of knowing. The true is the Dharma, it's the third person. The good is the we space between myself and all that is, myself and the divine, between myself and you. The good, the true, and the beautiful are all different forms of knowing. Or the I, the we, and the it. It's all ways of saying the same thing. I, we, it. Buddha, Sangha, Dharma. The beautiful, the good, the true. First person, second person, third person, these are all the great forms of knowing. And each one of these modes of knowing, each one of these eyes of the Spirit yields different forms of information, different ways of understanding. And only by gathering them together do we begin to get a depth understanding of reality.